tend to agree with David in terms of the idea of greed, and where I see one difference that the government plays a role in is kind of the view of markets. Okay, that instead of being markets are the best solution, that the bottom line is markets work, but they may not be best, or they may not be ideal, or they may not be efficient. And so the government role that could be played is in terms of, well, what do we want markets to do, and what can we expect markets to do? There's a very useful role there in markets. The economists will tell us that markets do work to allocate resources. Well, there are certain things that you can put in place that have an effect in markets. And that might be financial markets, that might be resource markets, that might be the other things. I mean, we can have all sorts of conversations about how the tax code, for example, impacts markets. Even in financial markets, short-term investments versus long-term investments. And if you have capital gains taxes versus ordinary income tax. If you listen to me, it would seem like with, regardless of whether it's Obama or McCain, and if you can look at the individual races, that you can start to get a sense of this, that will start to change. That there will be this attitude as far as what are we going to do to put either structure or institutional pieces in place that do have this impact on markets. And so that's what I hope to see in the short term, is those kinds of changes.
I don't see any change taking place. Well, I can see some change taking place on the governmental level, on the policy level, but on the fundamental value level, I don't really see it. And that's not to say I'm endorsing as some kind of American value consumerism. I'm not. But I'm not sure why we would move from that. We've got a long history of it. A very famous economist critic, Thorsten Veblen, that book was written in the early 1900s, and it's called Conspicuous Consumption. So it's not like this is something that we just developed as a society.
If I could jump in, since I teach ethics and I'm supposed to know something about values, and I think that it's important to appreciate just how much effort is expended to get people to act as irresponsibly as they do. And you're right, there are coexisting tendencies in American culture that on the one hand encourage self-sacrifice and frugality and prudence, and the other hand encourage accumulation of wealth and conspicuous consumption. And they have there's been this tension throughout. I think we're at a particularly profligate moment in our culture. This really is a gilded age. And I don't know, but I refer you to the levels of consumer debt that people are now carrying, and this is historically unprecedented. And I think public policy clearly condones, probably encourages, certainly does not prohibit the kind of practices that lead people to think that it's okay to be making $40,000 a year and be carrying $10,000 in debt, and revolving debt that's taking food out of their children's mouths. This has taken a long time to get to this level of lunacy. And I think that it's important to, if you start picking at it, you would probably find where you could, there's things you can do. There's no reason why you have to go home and throw away another half dozen credit card solicitations today. That is an enormous waste on every level. And if I succumb to one of them, it's even more wasteful. So, I think that you probably want to look at the level of dependency that we now as Americans have with the rest of the world and the inflows of wealth and the degree to which we're being subsidized by others. But it is a historical outcome. It's not something that values that people are born with. We've spent a lot of time teaching people to be this stupid. And you can unteach them or teach them something else. Now for them.
So when they file an income tax return, do you say how many cell phones does your family have? Because you were only going to let you have 2? Or how big is the car that you're driving? Because I mean, doesn't that start to run up against some elements of individual choice?
It runs up against limits. It runs up against policy that encourage people to overlook limits or to define away limits or to think that limits are irrelevant.
I think that public policy has
been involved with people overspending and having more credit cards. I guess I think of that as in the private realm rather than in the governmental realm.
I've got one. So you can tie a credit card to home equity these days. There you go. Tap in. It's instant.
It's a different
And,
thing.
yeah.
Different kind of piggy bank.
Right, and that gives you a tax break as well. Home equity it gives you a tax break.
So they could.
So the credit card's essentially a line of credit. So,
It's
but
a
that
home
already
equity line of
exists.
credit.
Sure.
Well, we were told to go shopping after September 11th.
Oh, yeah, and that is, I mean, that is an instance of an opportunity missed in leadership. And I would agree with David that I think leadership can play a role in setting a tone for a country and, you know, asking for sacrifice rather than for shopping as a response.
But there's this great moment in Jimmy Carter's presidency in which he gave, what's the name of that speech? What's it referred to as?
Just of confidence.
Yes, where he tells everyone they need to sacrifice, and it was a horrible failure, a complete disaster. And so it would be very hard for a political leader to go out and try that one again.
Well, no, you only need something like, you know, some sort of Churchillian situation where that sort of thing sells, but no one really believes we're in that sort of situation.
Well, what Tom Friedman wrote is that after 9/11, they should have raised the price of gasoline by $2 a gallon, which is what happened anyway, but that money could have been then used to encourage alternative development, this, that, and the other. People would have been willing to pay it because we had their attention.
I mean, I'm being facetious. No one is ever going to have an income tax form or other kind of form. How many cell phones do you have or anything like that? And I don't think we'll get to that point. You know, at times, and I teach in business, and one of the courses you teach in business is you know, entrepreneurship, and part of being entrepreneurial is recognizing opportunities and taking advantage of opportunities, and those are the kinds of things that you expect and you hope to see from students. At the same time, you know, opportunity can turn into opportunism. Are you doing something that has a benefit to you but a significant adverse impact on other people? And you know, that might get into this idea of greed. You know, when Gordon Gekko stands up in Wall Street and says greed is good, every time I say no, it's not. Okay? And now they're talking about making Wall Street too, so I don't know what he's going to say this time, but I guess I get a new spiel to respond to that. So
Greed's not so good.
I wonder whether we still live in a country where everybody has equal freedom to succeed.
And I think, I mean, I understand your point about the opportunity to, the freedom to fail, as long as those who fail then do not expect society to bail them out when they fail. And I think that's what's caused a lot of the anger in this current financial crisis. You know, they talk about privatizing profit and, you know, socializing or nationalizing risk. And, you know, the companies were fine with the government being uninvolved as they were on the way up, and then on the way down they say, oh, please, please come help us. And so that's seems to be, I don't know if that translates as well on a personal level, but it might.
I have to say, I don't think these European social democracies really keep people from failing. They do put a net underneath how far you let people sink when they do fail. And there's a sort of socially accepted level. You don't allow destitution. You don't allow people to suffer levels of misery that are allowed elsewhere. But people, certainly, they're not kept from, business failures exist in Europe and personal failures exist in Europe. And no matter what we do in this country, you'll still have a chance to fail if you like.
Ben Bernanke, who is chairman of the Federal Reserve Bank, understands that issue quite well. He understands the flip side as well, deflation. He's studied all of that. He's going to take care of us. I have faith in him. Certainly, is there a 0% chance? No, there is some chance, because what the Fed has to do in this situation is increase the money supply and increase it rapidly. That is the setup for hyperinflation. We aren't at that point, And I'm convinced that the people at the Fed know enough about what they're doing so that they won't let us get to that point. Barter springs up in a lot of situations, so I wouldn't take that as heavy evidence for this. But do you have a follow-up question?
Well, just a comment, but the M3 isn't even reported now, so no one really knows how much money is out there internationally.
Well, we know.
Remind us what the M3 is.
Okay, so now we've gotten technical. The Fed establishes several measures of money, and one is the narrowest measure. And really, all it is the currency, the stuff you carry around, and your checking account balances. That's pretty much M1. M2 adds in savings accounts and CDs and money market mutual funds. For a long time, the Fed also reported a number called M3, which added in some additional assets. As you can see, what we're doing with each of these measures is we're decreasing liquidity. So M1 is the stuff that's really money, it's liquid, ready to go. M2 is a little less, M3 was even a little less liquid. The Fed decided to stop reporting on M3 numbers because they found it wasn't a good indicator of how the economy was moving. They still have M2 and M1. If you look at those numbers, they've risen dramatically, just straight up recently. But you're right, we don't know what M3 is doing.
Well, we do, we just don't bother putting it. The raw data is still published.
That's right. You actually could put those data together if you wanted. I don't know anyone who's doing that. I'm not sure why.
That's a business opportunity, Steve. Put it up on a website, sell Google advertising.
And there was a question about the value of the dollar as well. The dollar has not been linked to gold since, well, technically since the early 70s when Nixon closed the gold window. That's the last time the dollar had any link to gold. So we're on a free float, and that means sometimes a free fall, or sometimes not. That's how most of the countries in the world are operating these days. It does mean that market conditions have a heavy influence on the dollar. And since our markets are so volatile right now and our economy is so uncertain, there's a lot of movement in the dollar's value. That's a reflection, in my view, that people just don't know what's going on yet. It's gone down, it's gone up. They don't know.
How do you stop people from trying to influence government? That's a basic premise of democracy. How do you, mass aggregations of money can be good guys or bad guys, I guess it really depends. You can stop, all sorts of people have influence. The AARP has influence. So how would you pick and choose, I guess, among the sorts of folks you want to influence the government? As well, lobbying is only one way to do that. Influence is everywhere, money is everywhere, and so long as you have a free market, a free political marketplace, you'll have aggregations of power, whether that comes from money or votes or something else. I think it's inevitable.
Yeah, Adam Smith said something too.
Yeah, so he was right. I think Smith's a pretty smart guy. Yeah.
It's been established for a long time that regulating, economic regulation is not unconstitutional. It doesn't amount to taking property or impairment of contracts or anything like that. We've had a securities regulation regime in this country since 1932. There's no constitutional issue involved there. We have all kinds of economic regulations. Now, you may say, normatively that's not good. Normatively it interferes with people's private interests and all of that, and it certainly does. It's designed to do that, but unchecked pursuit of self-interest is what got us into this mess and nearly destroyed the nation's economy. So I would say, is it legal? Yeah. Is it good? I would say, yeah, if it's used properly.
Can I just follow up too? I mean, don't oversell it. Substantive due process, the contract right, the property right. The contract clause is one of the first things the courts had to wrestle with folks on. It doesn't get a whole lot of press, but this was something going on in the 1820s there. And even back then, even though Americans are excoriated in international law reviews and journals and whatnot about being rapacious, individualistic, property rights, driven capitalists, whatever. The litany goes on. Even back in the court always said, even back in the 1820s, no, contracts, property, the use of capital, it's assumed that it would be monitored in the public interest, period. So no, they broke up monopolies in the 1820s, and that was that, even though contracts existed. So what we're really hoping for is that the good guys will regulate and that people will be responsible and not reckless when they take advantage of the freedoms that come with private markets. And we celebrate that when it works, but you know, this whole panel is based on the assumption that the horse is already out of the barn. So how are we going to go put it back in there and do it better next time? We don't know, but we just sort of hope that in the end that we all behave as well as we hope everybody else will behave, you know, and that the government will do the right thing before individuals do the wrong thing. That's good. We're living in
Do you, for the folks up here, is there something you're going to wish you had said when we break up? Here's your shot. Is there something, any final comments you want to offer? Because we're about out of time. No? Well, I want to thank all of you for being here, and thanks to the audience, and have a good evening.